The stray cat kept scratching the wall. Then a stranger smashed the wall and screamed. The scratching. It started subtly weeks ago, easily dismissed as rats or the settling groans of the old house. But it grew, becoming a nightly ritual, a persistent, deliberate clawing sound emanating from the living room wall near the boarded-up fireplace. It frayed Martha's already taut nerves, a soundtrack to her solitary evenings in the rambling suburban Chicago home she'd shared with her late husband Arthur. The noise was rhythmic, almost hypnotic, yet deeply unsettling, like fingernails scraping against bone just beneath the plaster. It always came from the same spot, relentless, maddening. Tonight, a vicious late spring thunderstorm raged outside, rattling the window panes and mirroring the tempest in Martha's own mind. She sat huddled in her armchair, clutching a porcelain teacup, trying to read, but finding her eyes drawn repeatedly to that section of wall. The scratching seemed louder tonight, more frantic, competing with the wind's howl. It seemed impossible, unreal, the kind of thing you only read about in unsettling folk tales. You'll want to see how this chilling mystery unfolds, so make sure you watch the entire video to uncover the shocking truth. And if you find yourself drawn into stories like this, please show your support. Like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our gripping content. For Martha, however, this was terrifyingly real, a sound that burrowed under her skin. Then abruptly, silence. The scratching stopped mid-scrape. Martha held her breath, straining her ears over the drumming rain. The absence of the noise was almost more disturbing than the sound itself. A minute passed, 2. Then the quiet was shattered, not by scratching, but by a sickening crunch, followed by a splintering crack. Someone was outside attacking the house. Heart hammering against her ribs, Martha crept towards the window, trembling fingers parting the heavy velvet curtains just enough to peer out. Rain lashed the porch, but through the deluge she saw him. A man gaunt and drenched his clothes, torn, wielding something heavy, a crowbar or a small sledgehammer, bringing it down again and again against the exact spot on the exterior wall where the scratching always occurred. Plaster dust and wood splinters flew with each impact. He paused, breathing heavily, rain plastering his dark hair to his skull. Then he threw his head back and let out a raw, anguished scream that tore through the storm's noise. It has to be here. It has to be. After all these years, Martha stumbled back from the window, a cry escaping her lips. She fumbled for the old rotary phone on the side table, her fingers clumsy with terror, dialing 911. As the dispatcher's calm voice filled the line, Martha could only whisper, her eyes fixed on the violated wall, "Someone's breaking in. He's screaming. He's tearing down the house." Outside, the man gave one final furious blow, the sound echoing like a gunshot. By the time the first police sirens wailed in the distance, he had vanished back into the stormy darkness, leaving behind a gaping hole in the wall, rainwater already darkening the exposed innards of Martha's home. Nearby, perched on the porch railing, seemingly indifferent to the chaos, sat a scrawny stray cat, its eyes glinting yellow in the gloom. Why that spot? Who was he? And what buried within the bones of her house was he so desperate to find? Martha Albright, 72 years old, had lived in the rambling Victorian house on Elm Street for nearly 5 decades. It was where she and Arthur had built their life, raised their now distant children, and where Arthur had eventually passed away from a sudden heart attack almost 20 years ago. Since then, Martha's world had shrunk to the familiar confines of the house and its small garden. She was a woman of routine, her days marked by tending her roses, attending church socials, and maintaining the meticulous, almost museum-like order within her home. She was known in the neighborhood as reserved polite, perhaps a touch proud, a pillar of quiet respectability. The house, however, was old. It sighed and creaked, needing constant upkeep that Martha managed with dwindling energy and funds. The scratching sound had begun about 2 months prior. At first, she'd assumed mice setting traps with grim determination. When that yielded nothing, she considered raccoons trying to nest in the wall cavity near the old sealed fireplace. She'd called pest control, who found no evidence of infestation, but noted some loose flashing outside near that spot. Perhaps an entry point. They suggested vaguely, charging her a hefty sum for sealing it. But the scratching continued, always at night, always from that same precise location on the living room wall. Then came the cat, a scrawny gray tabby with wary eyes and a torn ear. It appeared around the same time the scratching intensified. It seemed drawn to that specific section of the exterior wall, sometimes sniffing, sometimes rubbing against it, and often, especially at night, engaging in that relentless scratching, as if trying to dig its way inside. Martha had shooed it away countless times, sprayed deterrents, even called animal control, who'd shrugged. It was just another feral cat in an old neighborhood, but its persistence, its focus on that spot, felt unnatural, adding another layer to Martha's growing unease. Officer Jake Davies, young but calm and professional, arrived minutes after Martha's frantic 911 call. He found her shaken but unharmed, the living room displaying the aftermath of the stranger's assault. A jagged hole about 2 feet wide punched through the exterior wall, shattering the interior plaster, and lath exposing the dark cavity within. Rainwater dripped onto the polished hardwood floor. Davies took Martha's statement, noting her description of the man. Gaunt, mid-40s, ragged clothes, wild-eyed, screaming about something being here. He radioed the description out, though chances of finding him in the storm were slim. While documenting the damaged flashlight beam cutting through the dimly lit room, Davies played the light over the exposed wall cavity, tangled insulation, old wiring, and something else. Something solid wedged between 2 wooden studs, partially dislodged by the force of the blows. "Mrs. Albright," he said carefully, "did your husband ever do any major repairs on this section of the wall?" Martha frowned, peering closer. "Arthur, he wasn't very handy." But wait. A memory surfaced, hazy. After 2 decades, years ago, just before he passed, actually, he did spend a weekend messing with this wall. Said there was a draft from the old fireplace flue he needed to seal properly. He was very insistent on doing it himself. Wouldn't let me see until he'd replastered and painted. She'd thought it odd at the time, his secrecy over such a minor repair. Davies reached into the cavity, his gloved fingers closing around a cold metallic object. He pulled it free carefully. It was a small tarnished metal box, maybe tin or soldered iron, roughly the size of a shoebox. It was unexpectedly heavy and clearly very old, secured with a small but sturdy padlock, now rusted shut. Martha stared at the box, a chill tracing its way down her spine despite the room's humidity. She didn't recognize it immediately, yet a profound sense of disquiet washed over her. It felt like something forbidden, something meant to stay hidden. This was the inciting incident. The stranger's violent act had inadvertently unearthed a secret Arthur had literally buried within the walls of their home. The police now had the box, treating it as potential evidence linked to the stranger's desperate search. What had her respectable, predictable husband hidden away? And why, after 20 years, was someone willing to tear down her house to find it? Martha felt a tremor of fear, not just of the vanished stranger, but of what secrets the box itself might hold about the man she thought she knew. She insisted, her voice tight, that she be present when they opened it. She had to know. Given the circumstances, the violent entry, the mysterious box, Officer Davies decided it was best to open the container back at the station, where they had tools and could properly log the contents. Martha, wrapped in a borrowed police blanket, her initial terror replaced by a rigid anxiety, insisted on accompanying him. The drive through the rain-slicked streets was silent, the rhythmic swish of the wipers mimicking the scratching sound that had plagued her nights. At the station, under the flat fluorescent lights, a technician carefully pried open the rusted padlock. The lid creaked open, releasing a faint, musty smell. Old paper-dried flowers. A hint of something else, something vaguely floral and unfamiliar. Inside, nestled on faded velvet lining, lay the secrets Arthur had walled up 20 years ago. There was a thick bundle of letters tied with a brittle blue ribbon. The handwriting on the envelopes was elegant feminine, addressed simply to Arthur Miller, General Delivery, at the local post office. A measure of secrecy. Even then, Officer Davies, handling them carefully, opened the top one. The letter inside began, "My dearest Arthur," and was filled with passionate declarations, shared jokes, and intimate details of clandestine meetings. The dates spanned nearly 2 years, ending abruptly about 6 months before Arthur's death. The signature was Eleanor. It was definitively not Martha's handwriting. Beneath the letters lay a small, dark velvet pouch. Inside, cushioned by cotton wool that had yellowed with age, rested a stunning diamond engagement ring. It wasn't ostentatious, but the central stone was large, brilliant, and clearly expensive, far more valuable than the modest gold band Arthur had given Martha. Tucked beside the pouch was a single perfectly preserved pressed gardenia, its petals now brown and fragile. Martha stared at the contents, her face pale in her hands, gripping the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white. Evidence of a deep, long-term affair. An engagement ring intended for another woman. The dates confirmed. It coincided with a period when Arthur had been distant, working late, traveling more for business. Excuses she had accepted perhaps too readily. She felt a wave of nausea, a cold fury mixing with a profound sense of betrayal. Her carefully constructed memory of a stable, if unexciting, marriage began to crumble. I don't understand," she stammered, though the letter's meaning was painfully clear. "Arthur wouldn't. Who is Eleanor?" Before Officer Davies could respond, his radio crackled. A patrol car had spotted a man matching the stranger's description lurking near Martha Street. He seemed disoriented, but no longer violent. Davies instructed the patrol to bring him in non-confrontationally. 20 minutes later, the stranger stood in the station hallway, flanked by 2 officers, cleaned up, slightly stripped of the crowbar and the wildness. He looked less menacing, more desperate. His eyes, though red-rimmed, held a flicker of weary intelligence. He gave his name as Daniel Cole. "I know how it looked," Daniel said, his voice raspy. "I wasn't trying to rob her. I was looking for proof for my mother." He looked towards Martha, Then at the box on the table, Eleanor Cole. That was my mother's name. Slowly, haltingly, Daniel told his story. His mother, Eleanor, had passed away 2 months ago after years battling a chronic illness that had left her frail and often confused. Going through her meager belongings, Daniel found fragments of diaries, unsent letters, and cryptic notes hinting at a great love affair from her youth with a married man named Arthur Miller. The writings spoke of heartbreak, betrayal, and something precious, a ring promises that had been buried. Eleanor had become deeply depressed after the affair ended abruptly, never truly recovering, never marrying. She'd also obsessed over a beloved gray tabby cat that had vanished around the same time, often murmuring about needing to find her way back. Daniel, grappling with grief and the fragmented puzzle of his mother's past, felt an overwhelming need for answers, for validation of his mother's hidden life. He knew Arthur Miller had lived in this town, had died years ago. He came to Chicago with little more than a name and a desperate hope. He'd found Martha's house, Arthur's widow. He admitted he'd been watching the house for days, unsure how to approach growing increasingly agitated. The stray cat scratching relentlessly at the wall felt like some kind of sign, a bizarre confirmation from his mother's past. In a grief-stricken, irrational moment, fueled by the storm he'd given in to the overwhelming impulse to tear the wall down, convinced his mother's stolen legacy lay hidden there. Now confronted with the contents of the box, the letters in his mother's hand, the ring she described in her diary, Daniel's eyes filled with a mixture of vindication and raw pain. "He promised her everything," Daniel whispered, looking at Martha. "He bought her that ring. He was going to leave you. Why did he hide this? What did you do?" Martha recoiled, stung by the accusation. "That's a lie. Arthur was my husband. This must have been some youthful indiscretion he was ashamed of. He chose me. He stayed with me." But her voice lacked conviction. The dates on the letters weren't youthful indiscretions. They were from the heart of their marriage. The situation grew complex. Officer Davies now faced not just a case of vandalism, but a tangled, decades-old emotional conflict spilling into the present. Daniel Cole wanted answers, and perhaps restitution. The ring, at least Martha Albright wanted to protect her late husband's memory and her own dignity, but the evidence against her narrative was damning. And the catalyst for it all, the scrawny stray cat, was presumably still out there, having vanished from the porch when the police first arrived. Its strange behavior, the spark that ignited this explosion of buried secrets. The stakes were intensely personal reputation memory, the truth of lives lived and loves lost, all hinging on the contents of a box unearthed by a desperate son and a mysteriously persistent cat. The discovery of the box and Daniel Cole's impassioned story shifted the ground beneath Martha's feet. The police station, with its harsh lighting and impersonal atmosphere, felt like an interrogation room. Officer Davies, while sympathetic to her shock, treated the contents of the box with professional detachment. He documented the letters and the ring, taking careful notes. Daniel Cole, though calmer now, watched Martha with an intensity that made her skin crawl, a mixture of grief, anger, and pleading. He wanted more than just the box. He wanted the truth behind its burial. Davies arranged for temporary repairs to Martha's wall and advised both parties to seek legal counsel regarding the ring and any potential claims. He filed a report on the vandalism, but told Daniel that charges might be deferred pending further clarification of the situation, a tacit acknowledgement that this was far more complex than a simple property crime. Martha returned home, the tarnished metal box left in police evidence, but its contents seared into her memory. The days that followed were a blur of quiet tension. The neighborhood buzzed with discreet curiosity about the police presence and the boarded-up wall. Martha kept to herself, curtains drawn, phone unanswered. The house felt different, tainted. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the hallway seemed to whisper about Arthur's betrayal. She found herself rereading the few letters Davies had allowed her to photograph before logging them as evidence. Eleanor's words were full of life passion, a stark contrast to the quiet, predictable affection Arthur had shown her during those same years. She wrestled with her memories, searching for clues. She'd ignored Arthur's late nights at the office, his sudden weekend trips for conferences, his inexplicable melancholy moods that she had attributed to work stress. Had she been willfully blind, or had she known deep down and chosen denial as a shield? She remembered arguments, times she'd felt him slipping away, his vague reassurances that felt hollow even then. The image of her dependable, slightly dull husband was fracturing, replaced by a stranger capable of profound passion and deep deceit. Officer Davis, feeling the unresolved tension of the case, did some quiet, informal follow-up. He spoke to Mr. Henderson, the elderly man across the street who had lived there even longer than the Millers. Henderson recalled. Arthur remembered him as a private man. He also vaguely recalled a woman named Eleanor Cole, who had worked at the same downtown firm as Arthur decades ago. Pretty thing, sad eyes. Henderson mused. Caused a bit of a stir back then. I think there were whispers, but folks didn't pry in those days. It wasn't much, but it corroborated Eleanor's existence and her connection to Arthur Daniel Cole. Staying at a cheap motel near the highway didn't disappear. He called Martha twice, his tone less accusatory, more pleading. Please, Mrs. Albright, I just need to understand what happened to my mother. Why Arthur hurt her like that. Why he hid her letters, her ring. Martha refused to speak to him, hanging up abruptly. His persistence felt like another form of scratching, clawing at the defenses she was desperately trying to maintain. The turning point came unexpectedly. Officer Davis returned to Martha's house a few days later to take final photographs of the repaired wall section for his report. While examining the area closely, ensuring the temporary boarding was secure, his flashlight beam caught something tucked deep within the wall cavity behind where the box had been wedged. It wasn't insulation or debris. It was a single sheet of paper, folded and yellowed, that must have slipped down when Arthur originally placed the box. Davies carefully retrieved it. It was another letter, but the handwriting was different. Jagged, forceful, instantly recognizable to Davies from Martha's written statement. It was hers. It was addressed simply to Arthur. There was no date, but the paper and ink seemed contemporary with the hidden letters. It read, Arthur, I know about her. Don't insult me with denials. If you choose her, if you shame me like this, understand this, I will not go quietly. I will tell everyone, your partners, your clients, our friends, your precious reputation. Ruined, and her, I will make sure she suffers the consequences of wrecking a marriage. Think carefully about the life you want. Bury it. Bury all of it. Or I swear to God, Arthur, I will bury you both. as Davies read the letter, then looked at Martha, who had been watching him from the doorway, her face unreadable. He held out the single sheet of paper. "Mrs. Albright, is this yours?" Martha stared at the letter, her own angry words from decades past leaping out at her. The blood drained from her face. There was no denying it. This wasn't just about Arthur's affair anymore. This was about her response. The threat, the ultimatum, the possible coercion that had led him to literally entomb his past love within the walls of their shared home. Daniel Cole's accusations suddenly held the chilling weight of truth. Martha wasn't just the wronged wife. She was the enforcer, the gatekeeper of the secret. The discovery of her own letter shattered her victimhood narrative completely. She felt utterly exposed, the carefully constructed walls around her own past crumbling just as surely as the plaster had days before. This was the point of no return. The truth wasn't just about Arthur's secret. It was inextricably bound with her own. The discovery of Martha's threatening letter hung heavy in the air, an unspoken accusation that shifted the dynamic entirely. Officer Davies documented it dispassionately, his professional demeanor now tinged with a certain watchfulness. When he looked at Martha, he informed Daniel Cole of the finding, advising him again that while it shed light on past events, it didn't necessarily constitute a present-day crime, but acknowledged it substantiated Daniel's sense that his mother's story had been actively suppressed. For Martha, the house transformed from a sanctuary into a pressure cooker. The silence was no longer peaceful, but fraught with unspoken history. She imagined Eleanor's ghost lingering in the corners, Arthur's guilt soaking into the floorboards. Sleep offered little escape, her dreams filled with fragmented images. Arthur's troubled face, Eleanor's sad eyes as described by Henderson, the glint of the diamond ring, her own younger self writing that hateful letter, fueled by jealousy and fear. She felt trapped not by walls, but by the weight of her own past actions. Daniel Cole didn't relent. Armed with the knowledge of Martha's ultimatum, his pleading calls turned into quiet demands for a full accounting. "She needs to tell me," he told Officer Davies during a follow-up call, "not just what he did, but what she did. My mother lived her whole life under the shadow of whatever choice was forced upon Arthur Miller. I deserve to know the truth of it." Davies cautioned him against harassing Martha, but understood his need for closure. Martha's isolation intensified. She stopped answering the phone altogether, ignored the tentative knocks of neighbors offering casseroles and concern. She felt their eyes on her when she made rare trips for groceries, imagined their whispers. Had Arthur confessed to anyone? Had rumors circulated further than old Mr. Henderson let on? Her carefully maintained respectability felt like a fragile veneer about to crack. Her obsession turned towards the stray cat. It was still there, a constant silent sentinel. It no longer scratched the wall. Perhaps whatever scent or sound initially drew it was gone, or maybe its perceived mission was complete now the box was found. But it lingered near the porch, watching her with unsettlingly intelligent eyes. Martha began to see it as an extension of Eleanor, a furry embodiment of the past she couldn't escape. She found herself talking to it sometimes angrily, shooing it away. "Leave me alone, it's over." Other times, leaving out scraps of food with trembling hands, a bizarre peace offering to a history she couldn't undo. The cat accepted the food cautiously, but kept its distance, its passive presence a constant judgment. Internally, Martha wrestled with decades of self-deception. She had told herself Arthur stayed because he loved her, because their life together, their family ultimately meant more than his fleeting passion for Eleanor. She'd justified her ultimatum as protecting her marriage, her home. But the raw possessiveness in her own unearthed letter frightened her. Had it been love or fear? Had she saved her marriage or merely imprisoned Arthur within it? She remembered his quiet withdrawal in the final months before his heart attack, a distance she'd attributed to aging or work stress. Now she wondered if it was the crushing weight of the secret he carried buried just feet from where they slept. The situation felt increasingly unstable. Officer Davies increased patrols on Elm Street, concerned about the simmering tension between the grieving son and the cornered widow. He suggested counseling to Martha mediation services to Daniel, but both refused. Daniel felt he couldn't heal without the full story. Martha seemed incapable of relinquishing the control she'd maintained for 20 years, even though her secret was essentially out. This period became Martha's dark night of the soul. Alone in the oppressive silence of the house, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, she felt the foundations of her life eroding. The respectable image she had curated, the sanitized memory of her marriage, the justification for her long-ago actions, all crumbled under the weight of the unearthed truth. She knew Daniel wouldn't leave town without a final confrontation. Part of her dreaded it. Part of her almost craved the release it might bring. She considered fleeing, selling the house, disappearing. But where could she go? The house was her life, her identity flawed as it now seemed,